One of the standard personal weapons of the Army today is the 7.62mm L1A1 rifle. It is a self-loading air-cooled weapon for delivering single-shot fire at a potential rate of 20 aimed shots a minute. Initial cocking is achieved by pulling back the cocking handle and releasing it to fly forward again, thus loading the top round from the magazine into the chamber. Applying the holding open catch, removing the empty 20-round box-type magazine and replacing it with a full one. The holding open catch released by pulling back on the cocking handle. To control the amount of gas necessary to operate the mechanism, the gas regulator can be set as required. The change lever must be moved from safe to repetition before the trigger can be pressed. The weapon does, of course, conform to the principles of automatic weapons. This being so, the normal cycle of operations must apply, so that we find it functioning to fire, unlock, extract and eject, feed, cock, load and lock. First, let us briefly consider the action under these headings. First, fire. When the trigger is pressed, the hammer strikes the base of the firing pin. Next, unlock. Some of the gases which force the bullet along the bore are diverted through this vent and strike the piston head. The other end of the piston pushes the breech block carrier rearwards, which by internal cams lifts the breech block, unlocking it. Then extract. At the same time, this movement draws the breech block backwards, thus extracting the spent case. Continuation of backward movement causes ejection. The spent case is drawn sharply back against the ejector and is thrown clear of the weapon. Then feed. By now, the breech block has passed back beyond the magazine. The magazine spring pushes a fresh round into the path of the breech block, thus feed. Part of the cocking action occurs on backward movement. As the breech block carrier continues rearwards, it starts to reset the trigger mechanism. The second stage of cocking occurs after locking is completed in the forward movement, when the safety sear is tripped by the release bent of the breech block. Loading takes place on forward movement. The face of the breech block strikes the fed round and pushes it into the chamber. Now, locking. A system of cams forces the breech block down into engagement with the locking shoulder. The trigger is released and the gun is ready to fire another round. So much for the principles. Now to investigate them in greater detail. First, firing. The action is fully cocked and set to fire. When the trigger is pressed, it will rotate about its axis. The tail will rise and the trigger spring will be compressed. The tail of the sear will be forced upwards. The nose will be disengaged from the lower bent of the hammer. The sear spring will force the sear forwards along its elongated axis to bring its tail down and in front of the step in the trigger. At the same time, the nose will rise to friction on the hub of the hammer as the hammer, driven by the hammer spring assembly, flies forward to strike the firing pin head. This is the breech block. It contains the spring-loaded firing pin. On the